When you play the Game of Thrones, you
Subscribe and like.
or you die. There is no middle ground.
All right, hello YouTube. Welcome back to the Grease Comedy YouTube channel. In today's video, we are going to be talking about the two Valyrian Targaryen swords. Those being Blackfyre and also Dark Sister. I guess Blackfyre is not really a Targaryen sword, but it's linked back to their heritage. It's more of a Blackfyre, House Blackfyre stuff now, but we're going to try to figure out where these two are. And I feel like one of them is much easier to pinpoint than the other. So in this video, we're going to go through the recent history, or the most recent history we have of the two swords, and try to pinpoint their location and also the relevance to the normal story in Winds and in A Dream Spring. But before we get into the video, if you guys like to like, subscribe, and comment, please do. It helps the channel grow, reach your appeal that might like this content as well, and let's get into the video. So, like I said, I think one of them is much more difficult to figure out where it is and even how it's going to come back into the main story. So we're going to start with Blackfyre. This is the sword that we have very little information on. It's not in a place that's like as concrete, like, yes, this is probably where it is. Like, when we get to Dark Sister, it's like probably with Bloodraven and in the cave. Right now with Bran, that's probably where it is. Whereas Blackfyre, there's very little information about the sword to begin with and its whereabouts since Bittersteel took it with him into exile. And two, we have to make a lot of inferences because the sword is not actually named. So, for instance, when we see Hagon do his Blackfyre rebellion, we don't actually know if he had the sword. Like, you would assume he did because Bittersteel backed him, but we don't actually have concrete knowledge. So we're going to go through this whole path of Blackfyre. So important dates to kind of remember for this. The fourth Blackfyre ends in 236 with Daemon Blackfyre III's death. Also, we see about 6 years later, Bittersteel dies in 242 AC in the Disputed Lands, and that's all we know. We don't know if the sword was given to somebody else. We don't know what happened there. Daemon Blackfyre's cousin, Meleys, kills him anywhere from 241 AC to 258 AC. That is what is listed on the wiki for A Song of Ice and Fire. We don't know an actual death. Again, very long period in which he could have died. I would tend to believe it was probably later, towards like the 258 AC or kind of the 50s, much more than like the 40s. But again, we don't know exactly when that happens, and that is when Meleys takes over the leadership of the Golden Company. And then the last male heir that we believe, or Blackfyre, dies in 260 AC in the War of the Nine Penny Kings, being Meleys the Monstrous. So here's the question. This is the big idea that we have to figure out. Where did Blackfyre go? Did Bittersteel give it to someone? Did Bittersteel die with it? Did he maybe give it to Daemon Blackfyre, who is this cousin of Meleys? What was even the Blackfyre line of heritage, right? We don't actually know who Meleys' father was or Daemon's father was. Again, there's a lot of Daemons, so this is the Daemon that Meleys slays. Just keep that in the back of your mind. I'll try to keep it as simple as possible. So we're gonna have to pinpoint, okay, who is in charge or who is of whose line. Now, here's the biggest point. We know that Daemon and Meleys did not come from the same line because they were cousins. So we're going to have to figure this out. One of these two we know for certain is probably going to be of Hagon's line. Maybe one of the other one was from one of the female lines of the original, again, Daemon Blackfyre the first. So this is during the first Blackfyre Rebellion. One of his daughters could possibly have been the mother of one of these two. We are just not sure. And so, again, the first question has to revolve around what people, if we look at from history, did Bittersteel give the sword Blackfyre to? And it was always someone that he deemed worthy of it. So again, when we get to the second Blackfyre Rebellion, and this is very much noted in the third Dunk and Egg novella, Daemon the second Blackfyre doesn't actually have the sword, and Bittersteel doesn't support him. And this is mainly for a number of reasons, as, again, Bittersteel didn't really believe in him, didn't think that he was a good fighter, he didn't really remind you of the first Daemon. So, what did Bittersteel do? He didn't give him the sword. So this already shows the path that Bittersteel had to at least like you or respect you to give you the sword. So when we get to down the road with a character like Meleys, I think it's pretty safe to assume Meleys did not have Blackfyre. For the key reason that it's not noted by anyone. No one notes seeing the great sword Blackfyre. Barristan doesn't think of it. And Blackfyre also is not recovered by the throne. So right away, we have to consider this idea of if Bittersteel died, but he also, again, because Bittersteel does not instantly die, right? He ushers some commands to the Golden Company, even on his deathbed. Who did he give the sword to? You would have thought that would have been a big priority for Bittersteel. And I think when you look at the idea of how Bittersteel would have treated a character like Meleys, I think Meleys would have been seen as an outcast, as someone not worthy of the sword. And I think for me, I think my theory is I believe that Meleys was one of Haegon's sons, probably one of the younger of ones, because we just do not hear of him. But hopefully we'll get more of that in Fire and Blood Part 2 and the Duncan Egg novellas. But I believe that Meleys comes out as this deformed character, doesn't really look at all like Meleys. And let's also like rewind a bit. Like, let's come off of the end of the 4th Blackfyre Rebellion. The reason that Daemon Blackfyre, when he lands with the Golden Company, doesn't win is because he doesn't get any support. So if you're looking at it from Bittersteel's point of view, why would anyone support Meleys? And that's a fair point. Meleys is this, again, his nickname's Meleys the Monstrous. No one's going to support him in Westeros. If they weren't going to support Daemon Blackfyre III, they were not going to support Meleys. So I think it actually is quite sensible that Bittersteel saw this and didn't give it to him. And so, with all that being said, again, we also still don't even know that Haegon or Daemon III actually had Blackfyre. Again, you have to assume they did, because why wouldn't Bittersteel give it to them if he was supporting them to the Golden Company? But again, it isn't confirmed. So again, you can say that maybe he didn't, but I do think it heavily leans to it. And so we come to another point here where maybe Bittersteel was at a point where maybe he thought Meleys would just die. So again, because Bittersteel, when he comes back, he doesn't instantly crown someone. So that points to the idea that there was not the next person in line did not give Bittersteel a lot of hope that they could take the Iron Throne. Now, maybe it's because Bittersteel has failed now 3 times. And so he thinks, okay, maybe it's just not meant to be in my lifetime. Maybe he was tired. He was getting into his older age. I don't think so, though. That doesn't really strike me as the Bittersteel character. So what I think probably happened is I think Meleys was probably the next one that should have inherited the throne. But Bittersteel denies him that. I don't think Bittersteel wanted to crown him. I don't think Bittersteel would have. And so Bittersteel, I think, was very much playing it like a Daemon II in the 2nd Blackfyre Rebellion, where he was kind of just waiting for the situation to change so he can crown someone else, like maybe Meleys' cousin, Daemon Blackfyre, who was the head of the Golden Company, which tells you he was very well respected and or maybe liked. So that then, and when we also see this is kind of a role of like a Blackfyre. It feels like that was the line of succession, right? It was the power level for them. And so I personally have a lot of ideas that I think the reason Bittersteel doesn't openly give Blackfyre to anyone is because he didn't really live long enough for that to happen. And I very much see Meleys as this character that was an outcast. And when Bittersteel finally passes away, I think Meleys sees this opportunity that he can gain control of the Golden Company. They may not love him, they may not like him, but he can take it by force. And that's what ends up happening. So again, I think all of these signs point to this idea that Bittersteel was waiting for Meleys to die, or to at least become irrelevant. Just like how, when Daemon II dies, instantly Bittersteel makes Haegon the next king. So that is my idea there. So if we already eliminate, okay, Bittersteel didn't give his sword to, in my opinion, Daemon Blackfyre. Again, not any of the kings, the cousin of Meleys. He didn't give it to Meleys. Okay, well, who did he give it to? Or where did it go? And that is the question. We have a lot of routes that we can go down to. There's so many questions here. And the other reason I don't think, I don't know if I mentioned this, but the reason the Bittersteel didn't pass it to Daemon, and we know this, is because if he had, in this duel between Daemon and Meleys, I feel like it would have been talked about that Daemon had the sword, but he didn't. And that also, if Daemon then lost to Meleys, Meleys would have taken the sword for his own. So it's very unlikely that either one of these characters had it. But it also seems unlikely that Bittersteel left it in the possession of the Golden Company, as the sword is not given to young Griff instantly. And also, if, again, Meleys is this person in command of them, you would assume they would have to give him the sword, as he is the person in charge. But that doesn't happen either. Maybe they were withholding it from Meleys. Maybe that was one of Bittersteel's last commands. Who knows? But at the same time, then how come in the main story is the sword not given to young Griff? Maybe they were waiting for young Griff to prove himself? Maybe we're still yet to see the Golden Company give it to him? But I also feel like if they had been in control of Blackfyre for this long, it would have made an appearance somewhere. And it hasn't. So I don't like that idea either. So my biggest question then, as we go down the list here of who had it, is how long did Kala Blackfyre, this was one of the daughters of the first Daemon Blackfyre, and he was the one that, or she was the one that married Bittersteel. So how long did she live to? Because we don't know. We don't know how long Bittersteel's wife lived to. Could he have given her the sword to protect? I mean, it would have been a good person to probably have given it to, one of Daemon the first Blackfyre's descendants, and where maybe she was withholding it to give it to the true heir. Maybe? We just don't know. And then the next question is, well, even after Kala's death, because she would be dead by this point, where did the sword go after that? Did the sword eventually pass down a female line to a certain Sarah, Illyrio's wife, maybe? But if this is true again, why hasn't Illyrio given young Griff Blackfyre? It doesn't really make any sense. If Illyrio was sending young Griff to marry Dany, you would want to give young Griff some legitimacy. Having Aegon's sword to go meet with Dany would be a pretty nice thing to flex, but again, it appears that Illyrio doesn't have it. Or maybe Illyrio's holding the sword until young Griff becomes king, or maybe when it doesn't matter that Aegon has this Blackfyre sword, the family sword for the House Blackfyre, not even for House Targaryen anymore. Maybe Illyrio doesn't want to give young Griff the sword too early because maybe that would point to him being a Blackfyre. Who knows? So the last option to me is probably, I don't know if it's the most likely, but it's interesting because was the sword just lost? We know Bittersteel dies, and maybe someone from Tyrosh or Lys found it and still has it. Or maybe they sold it to Illyrio or Varys. I just think when you look at this sword, how has it stayed hidden for so long? Think about it. We have not heard of this sword since 242 AC. It's been, what, 60, 70 years now since this sword has been even seen, which is interesting. And so you guys might have clicked on this video thinking I had a concrete answer for where it is, but in reality, there's just too many question marks. History has left so many holes to where the sword could have gone. It could be with, again, the female line of the Blackfyres. Maybe that was one of Bittersteel's last commands. Maybe he just gave it to the Golden Company, which seems highly unlikely. There's so many holes. And so my conclusion is, if we look at where the story is going, I think you'd have to somehow find out that the sword is attained by Illyrio or Varys. That's what I think makes sense for me. but how it got to them still remains somewhat of a mystery. So that leads us to Dark Sister. Now, Dark Sister is a bit more straightforward. We know that Dark Sister was taken by Bloodraven. He was kind of the last owner of the sword to the wall. Now, when he gets there, for a while, he spends, I think it's 20 years he spends on the wall until he goes missing. And all of a sudden, he creeps back up in the normal story with Bran's plotline. Now, it would be pretty obvious to me to assume if Dark Sister is going to come back in the story, it's going to be with this cave. Maybe we see one of our characters pick it up. Maybe Bran warging Hodor sees the sword and he uses it to defend them against maybe the others' attack, like what we saw in the show. Maybe Mira picks it up. That would be a really cool idea, seeing Mira picking up Dark Sister. And I think Mira has some of the qualities that some of the other people that have wielded it have, like a Visenya. And that, I think, is the more straightforward answer for Dark Sister. Now, Blackfyre, to me, is an interesting sword, because the name inherently is very interesting when you look at the other plot. It is the Long Night. That's really the name of what is going to happen. It's already happened. And you have this sword called Blackfyre, and the night is black, and you have this fire in the darkness. Could Blackfyre be this sword known as Lightbringer? Could this be this version of it? Maybe. I know a lot of people think it could be Dawn, it could be Longclaw. It probably isn't actually even one, because prophecies are very hit or miss in George's world. But let me know what you guys think. I think Blackfyre is an extremely interesting sword to try and trace through history, because it just goes completely off the map. There's no record of anything, not even a sighting of it, after 242 AC. And even some of the prior history, we have to make some guesswork. George doesn't come out and straight up tell us that any of these people had Blackfyre, but we're left to think if they didn't, then it doesn't really make any sense with Bittersteel crowning these people. But that leaves the question, if Meleys and Daemon, again, Meleys' his cousin Daemon, not any of the other ones, didn't have it, and Bittersteel still had it this whole time, and who did Bittersteel give it to? Or did he give it to anyone? Was it just taken by someone? But then how does a sword so famous not reappear? These are all questions that hopefully we will get answered either in Fire and Blood Part 2 or in the normal story. But thank you guys all for watching. Let me know what your guys' theories are. I'm really interested to see what you guys think, especially about Blackfyre. And I will see you guys all in the next one. Bye, guys.